I hesitated at the edge of the overgrown path, the moonlight barely piercing the thick canopy of trees that loomed over me. The abandoned house, a decrepit structure hidden deep in the woods, beckoned like a haunting spectre. My heart raced as I took my first step forward, drawn by a morbid curiosity I couldn't resist. It had been the talk of our small town for as long as I could remember. They said it was cursed, that anyone who entered never came back the same. But I needed to know the truth. I needed to conquer my fears and prove to myself that there was nothing to be afraid of. The path was choked with weeds and brambles, clawing at my legs as I pressed on. The air grew colder with each step, and the oppressive silence weighed heavily on my chest. The distant hoot of an owl sounded like a mournful cry, warning me to turn back. I reached the clearing where the house stood, and the sight that met my eyes sent a shiver down my spine. The house was a derelict shell, its once grand facade now marred by time and neglect. Broken windows stared like vacant eyes, and the wooden boards creaked in the night breeze. I cautiously pushed the front door open, its rusty hinges groaning in protest. The interior was suffused with an eerie stillness, broken only by the distant howling of the wind. The air was damp and musty, carrying the scent of decay. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. Moonlight filtered through the shattered windows, casting eerie shadows that danced on the peeling wallpaper. The walls seemed to whisper secrets of the past, and the floorboards creaked beneath my feet as if they too had stories to tell. I explored room by room, my heart pounding with every step. In the kitchen, a table was set for a long-forgotten meal, covered in dust and cobwebs. The chairs were askew, as if the diners had fled in haste. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. Upstairs, I found the bedrooms. One was filled with faded toys, their eyes hollow and staring. In another, a cracked mirror reflected my fear-stricken face. I couldn't help but see the ghostly apparitions of those who had once lived here, trapped in the glass. As I continued my exploration, I came upon a room at the end of the hall. The door stood slightly ajar, and a faint light emanated from within. My curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed the door open. The room was unlike any other in the house. It was immaculate, untouched by time's decay. A single candle burned on a small, ornate table in the center of the room. Its flickering flame cast eerie shadows on the walls, and a chill ran down my spine. I approached the table, and my eyes were drawn to an old, leather-bound book. It lay open, its pages filled with strange symbols and arcane drawings. I couldn't decipher the text, but the sense of malevolence it exuded was palpable. As I reached out to touch the book, a voice whispered in the darkness.
"You should not be here."
I spun around, my heart in my throat. No one was there, yet the voice had been real, chillingly close. I backed away from the table, my eyes darting around the room. Shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and the temperature dropped even further. I knew I had overstayed my welcome. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut with a deafening crash, and the candle extinguished, plunging the room into utter darkness. Panic gripped me as I fumbled for my phone, desperate for any source of light. The room seemed to come alive with malevolent energy. Whispers filled the air, and the walls felt like they were closing in on me. I stumbled blindly, my heart racing, and collided with something cold and solid. My hands touched the source of the obstruction, and terror coursed through me. It was a skeletal hand, gripping my arm with a deathly grip. I screamed, struggling to break free, but the unseen force held me fast. The room was now filled with a cacophony of whispers, each one more sinister than the last. I could feel a presence, something ancient and malevolent surrounding me. I knew I was not alone, but I couldn't see what lurked in the darkness. In a final act of desperation, I recited the Lord's Prayer, my voice trembling with fear. As the words left my lips, the grip on my arm relented, and the room fell silent once more. I was alone, but I could sense that whatever had been awakened by my presence had not gone away. I stumbled my way out of the room and down the stairs, the darkness reluctantly giving way to the moonlit night. I burst through the front door, gasping for breath, and fled into the woods, not looking back. The abandoned house had lived up to its sinister reputation, and I had narrowly escaped its clutches. I knew now that some places were best left undisturbed, their secrets hidden in the shadows. But the horrors I had witnessed that night would haunt me forever, a chilling reminder that there are forces beyond our comprehension, lurking in the darkness, waiting to claim those who dare to trespass into the unknown. Awoke to a deafening silence that hung heavily in the air. The first light of dawn streamed through my bedroom window, casting eerie shadows across the walls. I rubbed my eyes and sat up, disoriented and groggy. It took me a moment to realize that something was terribly wrong. There was no usual hum of the city, no distant sirens, no chirping of birds. It was as if the world had fallen into a deep, unnatural slumber. I threw the covers aside and rushed to the window, pulling back the curtains. What I saw sent shivers down my spine. The bustling metropolis that I had known all my life had transformed into a ghost town. Skyscrapers loomed in the distance, their windows vacant and the streets were deserted. My heart pounded as I raced downstairs to my apartment building's entrance. Outside, I walked the empty streets, calling out for anyone, but there was no response. Panic set in, and I could feel a cold sweat forming on my brow. I walked to the nearest cafe, where I'd always grab my morning coffee, but it was locked and dark inside. The chairs were upturned, and the abandoned cups of coffee had long gone cold. This couldn't be happening. I decided to head towards the city center, hoping to find answers. With each step I took, the weight of solitude pressed upon me. Abandoned cars cluttered the streets, newspapers lay scattered, and the wind carried the faintest echoes of laughter and chatter. It was as though the city had been swallowed by an abyss. My phone buzzed in my pocket, giving me a glimmer of hope. I fumbled to answer it, my voice trembling as I spoke to my friend Sarah. She was just as confused and terrified as I was. We decided to meet at our favorite park in the city, where we had spent countless hours together. The walk felt like an eternity as the emptiness enveloped me, each step echoing in the eerie silence. The park was just as desolate as the rest of the city. Sarah wasn't there yet, so I sat on the bench, waiting and watching. But as the minutes turned into hours, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. She had always been punctual, and her absence only fueled my anxiety. Had something terrible happened to her too? I paced back and forth, contemplating my options. I couldn't stay in this city any longer. I had to leave and find help, contact the authorities, or anyone who could explain this nightmarish scenario. Just as I was about to turn and leave, a soft voice reached my ears. "Hey there, what are you doing here?" I spun around to find Sarah standing behind me, a bewildered look on her face. Relief washed over me, and I ran to hug her tightly. She was the first person I had seen since waking up alone in this silent city. "Sarah, you won't believe what's happening," I exclaimed, trying to catch my breath. She frowned. "I know, it's so bizarre. I woke up to an empty apartment and I've been wandering around looking for someone, anyone." Together, we decided to explore further, hoping that we weren't the only ones left. As we walked, we shared stories of our attempts to contact friends and family, all met with eerie silence. The fear we felt was palpable, but having each other's company was a small comfort. In our search, we stumbled upon a library. The heavy wooden doors creaked open, and we entered a cavernous space that felt almost sacred. We moved between the towering bookshelves, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. It was here that we found an old, dusty journal on a table. The journal belonged to a man named David, who described a similar experience of waking up alone in the city. He documented his increasing despair and paranoia as days turned into weeks and there was still no sign of another living soul. His final entry was chilling, written in a trembling hand. "I can't take it anymore. I'm not alone, and they're watching me." A shiver ran down my spine as I read those words aloud. It was as though a heavy cloud of darkness had descended upon us. We knew we had to leave the library and continue our search, but anxiety gnawed at us. Were we truly alone? What had happened to the city? We left the library and made our way to the outskirts of the city. It was there, on a bridge overlooking the river, that we saw something that filled us with terror. A figure, cloaked in darkness, stood on the opposite side. We froze, our hearts pounding, and exchanged fearful glances. The figure beckoned to us, a slow and deliberate gesture. Fear surged through our bodies, but curiosity got the better of us. We cautiously made our way toward the shadowy figure, our footsteps echoing on the empty bridge. With every step, the figure seemed to draw farther away, maintaining a deliberate distance. "Who are you? What's happening here?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling. The figure remained silent, but gestured for us to come closer. Its outline was hazy, shifting like smoke. As we reached the center of the bridge, the figure suddenly stopped and turned to face us. It lowered its hood, revealing an indistinct, featureless face. A cold wind swept through the area, and the world around us darkened. Fear clenched my heart as I realized that we were not alone in this nightmare. The figure in front of us was not human, but something otherworldly, something beyond my comprehension. I turned to Sarah, and her eyes mirrored the terror that gripped me. In that moment, the world shattered. The city dissolved into a swirling vortex of darkness, and I felt myself being pulled into an abyss. My last memory was Sarah's terrified scream as we were swallowed by the darkness. I awoke with a start in my own bed, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. The first light of dawn streamed through my window, casting familiar shadows on the walls. It took me a moment to realize that I was back in my own reality, my own world. The city was bustling outside, and I could hear the distant sirens and the chirping of birds. It was just a dream, a terrifying nightmare that had felt all too real. I rushed to call Sarah, relieved to hear her voice on the other end of the line. She had experienced the same nightmare and was equally shaken. We shared our vivid recollections of the eerily silent city, the journal, and the figure on the bridge. As the day went on, we both struggled to shake off the lingering unease that the nightmare had left behind. It felt as if the events of the dream had seeped into our reality, a sinister presence that refused to let go. We couldn't help but wonder if the nightmare was a warning, a glimpse into an alternate reality, or something else entirely. One thing was certain: the nightmare had left its mark on us. It had shown us a world where we were truly alone, where the city we had known had vanished, and it had made us question the boundaries of reality and the depths of our fears. The darkness outside pressed against the car windows like a thick, impenetrable veil. Rain drummed relentlessly on the roof, creating a disconcerting symphony that seemed to echo the turmoil in my mind. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles pale against the leather. My decision to take the back roads on this rainy night was beginning to feel like a grave mistake. The narrow road stretched out ahead, its asphalt glistening with a sinister sheen, illuminated only by the dim glow of my headlights. The trees on either side of the road swayed ominously, their branches clawing at the sky as if yearning for release from their earthly confines. The faint outlines of old, crumbling structures emerged intermittently in the darkness, remnants of a forgotten town. My GPS had assured me that this was a shortcut to my destination, but it felt like a journey into a nightmare. I cursed myself for not checking the weather forecast. The rain showed no signs of abating, and the wipers worked tirelessly to clear the incessant deluge from the windshield. Visibility was limited, and my heart raced with each bend in the road, unsure of what lay ahead. The sensation of being watched, of unseen eyes peering from the shadows, gnawed at me. As I drove deeper into the desolate countryside, a chilling thought crept into my mind. I hadn't passed another car for miles. The isolation was unnerving, and I longed to see the reassuring glow of headlights approaching in the distance. But the road remained empty, except for the relentless patter of raindrops and the eerie whisper of the wind. My headlights suddenly flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the road. Panic surged through me, and I desperately tried to regain control of the car. The engine sputtered, and I cursed my old, unreliable vehicle. The car came to a shuddering halt, and I was left alone in the suffocating darkness. I fumbled for my phone, my trembling fingers struggling to unlock it. When the screen finally illuminated, I saw the dreaded no signal message mocking me. My heart sank as the realization hit me. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no cell service and no idea which direction to go. The oppressive silence was shattered by a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. It was a soft, mournful wail, like a ghostly lament carried on the wind. I strained my ears, trying to locate the source of the sound. It grew louder, more desperate, echoing through the trees and filling the air with an unsettling unease. In the dim glow of my phone's flashlight, I stepped out of the car and peered into the darkness. My breath misted in the cold, wet air as I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" There was no response, only the relentless rain and the haunting wail that seemed to surround me. I felt a deep sense of foreboding, an instinctual urge to retreat to the safety of my car and lock the doors. But something compelled me to move forward, to follow the eerie sound that seemed to beckon me deeper into the woods. With each step, the trees closed in around me, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the rain. The forest felt alive, teeming with unseen eyes that watched my every move. I stumbled over roots and fallen branches, my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, I emerged into a small clearing, and what I saw there froze the blood in my veins. In the center of the clearing stood a dilapidated, ancient-looking house. Its time-worn facade was barely visible beneath the encroaching vines and moss. It looked abandoned, but the wail that had drawn me here emanated from within. Against my better judgment, I approached the house. The door creaked open with eerie ease, as if inviting me inside. The interior was even more unsettling, with rotting furniture, cobwebs, and a pervasive odor of decay. The wailing sound grew louder, now unmistakably human. I followed the sound to a decrepit staircase that led to the basement. My flashlight revealed a small, dimly lit room, and in the corner sat a figure shrouded in tattered rags. It was a woman, her eyes empty and hollow, her wails echoing with a heartbreaking sadness. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. She turned to look at me, her eyes locking onto mine. In that moment, I saw a depth of despair and anguish that chilled me to the core.
"Help me!"
she whispered, her voice a haunting plea. I took a step closer, my heart filled with sympathy and dread. "What happened to you?" But before she could answer, a sinister presence descended upon the room. Shadows twisted and contorted, and a malevolent force seemed to emanate from the very walls. The woman's wails turned into a blood-curdling scream as I watched in horror. I fled from the basement, sprinting through the decrepit house and out into the rain-soaked woods. Behind me, the woman's screams faded into the distance, but the feeling of malevolence pursued me, a relentless presence that refused to be shaken. Hours later, I stumbled upon a main road and was rescued by a passing motorist. I told them about the house and the woman, but when we returned to the spot, there was nothing there but an empty, overgrown field. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. Was it a ghostly encounter, a figment of my imagination, or something far more sinister lurking in the darkness? I may never know, but I do know one thing. I will never take the back roads on a rainy night again. I woke in a room I didn't recognize. The air was heavy with a damp, musty odor, and a flickering fluorescent light above cast eerie shadows across peeling wallpaper. Panic surged through me as I struggled to remember how I had ended up here. I tried to sit up, but my hands were bound to a rusty metal bed frame, and my body ached as if I'd been lying there for hours. My heart raced and I began to shout, demanding to know where I was and who had put me here. The only response was the echo of my own voice, bouncing off the decaying walls. As I strained to free myself from my restraints, the door to the room creaked open, revealing a long, dimly lit hallway beyond. A tall figure stood there, silhouetted against the faint light. Fear gnawed at my insides as the figure stepped closer, revealing a twisted grin on a face that should have been familiar.
Welcome back,
It said, its voice a chilling mockery of my own. My mind raced to understand, to piece together the fragmented memories that began to resurface. I had been investigating a series of disappearances, and now I was the one who had vanished. The figure approached, and I recognized my own features, as if I were looking into a distorted mirror.
You thought you could uncover the truth, didn't you?
My doppelganger whispered, the words dripping with malice. As it leaned closer, I could see something deeply unsettling in its eyes. They were darker, almost void-like, devoid of any humanity. My own voice continued,
You were getting too close, so I had to bring you here, to this place where your nightmares come to life.
With a sudden jerk, my restraints loosened and I scrambled off the bed. The figure vanished down the hallway and I knew I had to follow. The alternative was staying in that room, not knowing what horrors awaited me. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper and flickering lights overhead cast eerie, ever-changing shadows. The air grew colder and the floor felt damp beneath my feet. My footsteps echoed loudly in the silence, but the figure remained elusive. As I moved deeper into the corridor, I began to notice strange, disconcerting details. Doors with peephole-like windows revealed unsettling scenes inside, nightmarish tableaus of people trapped in their worst fears. One door showed a woman drowning in a room filled with water, her terrified eyes pleading for help. Another revealed a man surrounded by crawling, hissing insects that bit and stung. Each door was a portal into a personal hell, and I shuddered at the thought of what horrors awaited me. The figure reappeared further down the hallway, beckoning me to follow. It taunted me with cryptic words, always just out of reach. I had no choice but to chase it deeper into this nightmarish labyrinth. Eventually, I reached a room that was different from the others. The door was ajar, and the figure stood inside, its eyes locked onto something in the corner. I hesitated, my heart pounding, then cautiously entered the room. What I saw sent a shiver down my spine. In the corner of the room was a mirror, but it didn't reflect my own image. Instead, it showed a distorted version of myself, emaciated and covered in wounds. The reflection's eyes were hollow, and its mouth contorted into a silent scream. My doppelganger's voice whispered from behind.
This is what you'll become if you don't find a way out.
I stumbled back, overwhelmed by the horror of my own potential fate. The figure suddenly lunged at me, its hands wrapping around my throat. My vision blurred, and I gasped for air as I fought to break free. But the figure's grip was ironclad, and darkness began to close in around me. Just as I thought I would lose consciousness, I managed to break free and stagger back. The figure reeled, and I fled from the room, leaving the mirror and its terrifying reflection behind. As I continued down the corridor, I couldn't escape the feeling that this place was a manifestation of my own fears and regrets. It was as if my own mind had turned against me, bringing my darkest nightmares to life. The corridor seemed endless, and I realized I was trapped in a never-ending cycle of fear and torment. The figure appeared again, always just ahead, leading me further into the abyss. Hours turned into days. Or perhaps it was mere minutes, but time had lost all meaning. I had encountered countless horrors, twisted versions of my own fears, each more terrifying than the last. The labyrinth of my mind seemed endless, and the figure's sadistic laughter echoed through the never-ending corridors. Desperation consumed me, and I knew I had to find a way out. With each encounter, I had learned a little more about the figure that tormented me. It was a manifestation of my own doubts and self-destructive tendencies, a dark reflection of the worst parts of myself. As I ventured deeper into the nightmare, I began to confront these demons within. I faced the guilt of past mistakes, the fears that had haunted me, and the doubts that had held me back. With each confrontation, the figure grew weaker and I grew stronger. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached a door that was different from the rest. It was adorned with a simple, tarnished brass handle. I turned the handle and stepped through, and to my amazement, I found myself in a small, dimly lit room with a single window. The figure, now a mere shadow of its former self, stood before me. It whispered, "You can't escape from yourself." But I had learned that the power to overcome my fears and doubts lay within me. I faced the figure head-on and, with a surge of determination, banished it into the darkest corners of my own mind. As the figure vanished, the room brightened, and I felt an overwhelming sense of relief and clarity. The window revealed a beautiful, tranquil scene outside, as if the nightmare had never existed. I had emerged from the labyrinth of my own mind, having confronted and conquered my inner demons. The experience had been harrowing, but it had also been a journey of self-discovery. I had learned that the most terrifying horrors can be found within ourselves, and only by confronting them can we hope to find our way back to the light. With a deep breath, I stepped out into the serene landscape beyond, leaving the horrors of the labyrinth behind. The nightmare was over, but the lessons I had learned would stay with me, a reminder that the darkness within us can be our greatest adversary and ultimately our most powerful weapon.